this is Eli here, and today we are going to do a vectorization project with acrylics on an illustration board. Now the thing that you need to know about acrylics is that they dry really fast. That means you have to work very fast. The thing is, you can either use this as your advantage or it can be the downfall of your project. So how can you use this as an advantage? Well, unlike oils, where it takes time for it to let it dry and then go over it with another layer, with acrylics you can actually do that faster. You can actually do it in one setting. So you put the paint on, you wait for a couple of minutes to dry, and you can go over it with another layer. Now, that does not mean that you can have unlimited tries of layering. The thing with layering is that the more layers that you have, the more texture you will have. Well, depending on your artwork, if you want it to come out clean, texture is the last thing that you want, especially for a vectorization project. Now, if you're copying something, a scene or a picture, you might want to have that reference image next to you, and you really want to try and match the colors by heart. Okay, it doesn't matter if it's a shade here and there. I mean, we're all humans, artists are humans. If you want to copy it, we'll just take a picture, right? So that's the thing, it doesn't need to be exact, but you want to get it as close as you want. I mean, that's the whole point of this project. That's something that you want to learn. Now, you can try to get it as close. If you're not happy with it, we'll let it dry. The thing with illustration boards and acrylics is that if you have a light color and you go over it with a coat, what happens is the paper, or the board in this case underneath, is going to shine through, and that will create something like stains. It will look like stains, right? The color is actually the stain on the paper. It doesn't really resemble paint. Now when you have a dark underlay and you overlay it with a lighter layer, you get that light layer, but it has a shadow darkness to it. Also, I will be using Winsor Newton's Galleria Acrylics, and these are student grade acrylics. It's not as good as Golden, but still gets the job done, because if you're a poor artist like me, especially for school, you don't want to use artist grade because it's not worth it. I mean, come on, none of us actually turn in our best work for school now, do we? So if you're on a tight budget like me, well, you can use Galleria. If you're on a potato budget, then I would actually recommend not get Galleria, because the primary sets cost around like 30 bucks. So, but if you want to go fully potato, you can get Liquitex Basics. So these are really bad quality. It has a really bad texture, but it's like sticky, it's gluey, right? You can get the whole set for what, 15 bucks. Right? So at the end of the day, acrylics is acrylics. Well, the more you pay, the better grade you get. For brushes, we actually will be using sable brushes. Now the thing with sable is that they're smoother than natural hog bristles, right? So natural hog bristles that you use for oil, they're thick so that they can hold the paint. But with acrylics is that if you have a thick brush, it will still work, but you get a really rough texture. However, the philosophy with me and my channel is that go in rough and fix it later. With sable, well, you may get it right the first time and you don't have to do that. Nevertheless, it's still a good practice to try to get it good the first time. Mistakes can happen, problems will be caused, so you can fix it later. That's the beauty with art, especially with acrylics and other, if you're gouache. PTSD. Yeah, if you're gouache, you will never have a go back button, trust me, it's weird. In any case, without further ado, let's get started. Make sure you have a bottle of water and also your reference picture. And also, you need a good palette. Don't get those crappy plastic palettes. They're pretty small and you can't really mix anything, and you'll be tempted to mix with a brush. Never mix with a brush. Unless it's like a tiny amount of paint, you want to test it or something, sure, go ahead and mix it with a brush, but never mix it with a brush. Make sure you make enough paint and make sure you mix with a palette knife. That's why they exist, for Jesus. For my palette, I will be using a glass palette. As you can see, I still have some paint, and I already started the project, but you don't need to sit here and watch me do the whole thing, but I'll just go over the techniques that I use. For the palette, I will be using a glass palette which is taped to a board. It's pretty easy to make. You can make it for less than 15 bucks. I may even make a video about that if you like. But the good thing about it is that you can mix paint, and you can use like plastic wraps that you can find in kitchens, and you can put over your paint, and you can actually conserve and save your paint, which is a really good technique for, especially for artists that are on potato budget. It's better if you work on a slanted surface. It's easier for the hand. Also, sometimes if you want to get really clean edges, you can rotate your artwork and you can use your brush, especially if it's a flat brush like mine. You would be able to get those nice and crisp edges. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started. We're gonna start by mixing this color here, which is a yellow beige. I'm gonna use my glass palette right here. I'm gonna use this area that is empty. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put some white, because majority of this color is white. So I'm gonna start with a lot of white. Around this much should be sufficient. Here's my hand for reference. Okay, so when I'm looking at this color, I see yellow, I see brown. That's what you always wanted to do. You want to look at the color and think about what you see, instead of like what you think that you see. Sometimes you look at sky and say, oh, sky is blue, or the water is blue, so I'm gonna paint it blue. Well, here, as you can see, the sky is nowhere close blue. It's actually a beige color and whatnot, and actually my first attempt, it came out browny or reddish, but it's not like that. So you can always test like small colors. I can see like I tested here, and this was like a really bright yellow, but you can test in small amounts, and if you get the ratio right, you just multiply the ratio. Okay, so this is a really light color, so I started with white, but as you can see, it's also a very desaturated color. So there are several ways to make something desaturated. Some colors you can do complements, although not others. You can mix it with complements, but the best and fastest technique, in my opinion, is to mix it with gray. Now, there are different types of gray. What I have here is the Liquitex Basic Gray, which is a natural gray, and it will actually help to desaturate the color. Now, remember, gray is strong. It's a strong color, so you don't need a lot of it. So I added a little of that, and remember, gray is the mixture of black and white, and depending what type of white you use, or what type of black you use, it's going to be cool or warm, a warm or cool gray. Now, I believe this is a mix of ivory black and titanium white, so it's a natural blue, because the ivory black is cool and titanium white is warm. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm gonna mix the color. Right now it's more of a grayscale. You can use a metal palette knife. It's the best in my opinion on glass. And the thing with acrylics is that it's a little bit harder to mix, and it takes a little bit more time than oils. But we can get there. Well, for most projects, I would say that try to not mix too much, because as Bob Ross used to say, you would actually kill the color. But this project, it's special. It's a vectorization project, and you want your colors to come out super clean, so you want to actually mix the colors pretty well. Now, okay, so this is now a grayish white, I would say, or just gray, really light gray. But I would still think it's too bright. But I'm not gonna add more gray here. I'm just gonna try to get into color and then start to play with value there, because it's really hard to tell what value it is when you're only working just with the value but not the color. So to me, I could start with yellow ochre, I could start with brown, I can start with red. So what I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna add in a little bit of yellow ochre, just a little bit, because remember, this is not yellow, it's actually beige. And what I'm gonna do is that I'm actually gonna add in a little bit of green. Now remember, green is really, really strong. So I suggest just use a teeny tiny amount, like the tip of your knife kind of amount. And also you need a rag. Okay, so I'm gonna clean my knife because it has a lot of white on it. Okay, my rag here. Now I'm gonna take a small tip, as you can see, really small, and I'm gonna add it in my yellow ochre. Now you may not see a change, but it does actually change the color. I'm gonna add a little bit more green here. Okay, and then tip of the knife, yellow ochre, I'm gonna mix it in. It's always better to mix with the back of your knife rather than the front, because you can't. I mean, it's really hard to get the color to the back into the palette when it's on the front of your knife. So just a backwards motion, especially if your palette is a little bit tilted. It's really, the color itself will just form a wave like motion. So I would say that this color is getting closer. Let me zoom in a little bit for you. So it's the color right here, but it's still way too bright. Way too bright. So at this point, I recommend adding brown. Okay, what happens when you add black is that the black will take the color away. The black desaturate, black and white desaturate. That's why you use gray to desaturate, because it's a mixture of black and white. So you actually make a tint or a shade. Well, in the case of black, you make a shade, so it takes the color out of there. But then because of that, you have to use another color that's dark in value, but it's actually saturated. So something like burnt umber, or in this case I would actually recommend raw umber, but I don't have raw umber, so I have to make it with burnt umber. Now it's more of a like chocolatey, you need more of a chocolatey color than yellow color. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add a little bit of, here I'm gonna add some burnt umber. Okay, you can't see it because it's the top of my palette. And I'm gonna add gray because I'm gonna desaturate that burnt umber. Okay. I'm gonna clean my knife. Now I'm gonna, let me zoom this back out for you. There we go. So what I do is I'm gonna add some brown to white. You want to take it slowly rather than just dipping the color inside, because you can add more color, but you can never take out color out of it. unless you add more of the opposite color, but then you'll be wasting paint because you're making a huge pile of paint. Cool. Let me tell you a funny story. There was a girl who sat next to me, and basically she gave me some money in exchange for my paint. I was thinking, okay, because like I had a Winsor blue, but she didn't, but she needed Winsor blue, so I was like, okay, you can use my Winsor blue, just pay me for like half a tube or something. Turns out, not only he used my Winsor blue, he used all my Winsor colors, the whole Galleria colors, and they're expensive. Okay, I'm a student, and they're expensive. And she basically just used it all, like, and I was looking at her, and she would just keep adding color because she would just go in the wrong direction. Okay, because she would add a lot of paint, and then it was hard for her to get close to what she wanted. So she would add more paint, more of the opposite paint, and then more of the opposite paint, just to try to go the opposite direction each time she went too far. And she ended up with a huge container of paint just for a little part of her painting. I'm gonna take a little bit, remember, a little bit, you don't need a lot, and try to mix it in with my light color. Okay, it's still way too light. But also, one thing that you have to remember with acrylics is that on the palette, because it's shiny and transparent, on the palette it will always look lighter. But in this case, it's already too light. So we have to like keep going until it's darker and better for our use. You can always test it before you apply it onto your work. Test, test, test. Never get tired of testing. But your hand may get tired of mixing. In my case it is. Okay. And before I take more paint from my burnt umber and gray pile, I always clean my knife. You don't want to contaminate your paint. Okay? So I clean my knife, take some more paint, same ratio, and mix it in. Okay. Since we had gray in my burnt umber, what's happening right now is that as I'm mixing the darker color into my paint, I'm losing chroma, or hue, I believe. The terminology is weird, but usually it does make sense. So I'm losing color. It's becoming desaturated, vibrancy. That's what I'm losing here. But I'm getting really close. Still a bit too light, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to test it on the next on my palette knife. So this is my reference picture. I'm going to put it on. And just wait for it to dry, and then we can tell. But I believe I got the right color. I believe this is it, because as it's drying on my reference paper, it looks right. But then again, different materials will have different lightness to them, so may not be the same when it dries. It may not be the same on the illustration board, but yeah. So this is the color that we got on the palette, and just so that you can see, this is the color that we're trying to make. Now, if you look at this, you see that this is way lighter than this. This is way darker, but just as I said, as you can see, when it dries, it becomes so much like the color. And that's the thing with acrylics. It's gonna trick you to think that it's lighter, but actually it's the right color or even darker. Okay, so my first try with this background, as you can see on my board, I'm gonna transfer this to so you can see the work. The first color that I tried, it was actually too dark. It was the right color, but it was too dark. So I went in and added a chocolatey color here. So remember, when you're not using a brush or a knife, you want to put it in water because you don't want the paint to dry on your tools. Because once it dries, it's really hard to get, especially on brushes. It will actually damage your brushes because when the paint dries on this part, I'm not sure what it's called, but when it dries in this part, it's gonna like dry and then give a direction to the bristles, and that's not good for your brush. It will damage it, and you will have like bristles popping out of everywhere like this. Okay, so because this is a large area, I'm gonna use a larger brush. So what I'm gonna do is I have my pile of paint here. I'm gonna dip my brush in water. Now remember, water, the more water you use, the more transparent, but I'm gonna actually wipe my brush, my wet brush, with a clean part of the rag. I got it dirty. I usually use the dirty part of my rag accidentally, but since it's the same color, it's not gonna be that much of an issue. But make sure, especially with bigger brushes, you want to actually like dry it. I just added water to it to make it smoother, but I don't want water in my color because vectorization, it's all about one clean color layer. You don't want transparency. It's not watercolor, it's not gouache. You don't want transparency. You want a clean matte surface, okay? And the less texture, the better. It's like the image trace in Illustrator, okay? So I'm gonna dip my brush. Okay, I'm not gonna dip it in a way that I'm making soup, but like dip the tip of my brush. Okay, you want to get it on the both side, but you want to get the tip, not the whole brush, because well, it's gonna make a mess. And then I'm going in. I'm gonna think of patches, different patches on my artwork, so that if there's like a color discrepancy, then it's like in different zones rather than like in the middle of a pile. So I'm gonna start with this patch first, then this patch, and then go down, okay? Okay, I'm painting, and as soon as you hear a rough sound, you know that the paint is actually finished on your brush. That's the thing with acrylics. You can't get a lot of paint with one single dip, so get more paint. And that's a little bit tricky with acrylic, because like if you're working in patches, if you get more paint, you might actually get some color discrepancy or some textures, but in this case we're fine. I mean, so this patch is done. Okay, now I'm gonna dip it again, go to the next patch, and you also want to have a back and forth motion, back and forth, back and forth. There we go. Try to not go back unless like you made a mess, but it's better to not go back, especially with vectorization. Start from the other side. And remember, the philosophy of me and my channel is to go in rough, fix it later, my friends. Go in rough and fix it later. You wanna be messy at first, but fix it later. But don't be messy to a degree that you cannot fix something, especially like with gouache. Like this philosophy does not work with gouache. Okay, gouache is like, you can't go back, especially if you use it as a solid color for a vectorization project. Remember, if you get a lot of paint on paint, what happens is that you get a texture. Now, see, I got a problem here. So, there was a little bit of area that it wasn't painted between the patches, and what happened, I applied another patch, and now you see that it's brighter. But here's the thing with acrylics. Since they both have the same background color, you just have to wait. Have patience. Let it completely dry. Okay? Let it completely dry. I can't stress this enough. Let it completely dry, because when it's wet, it's lighter. When it's completely dry, it becomes darker. Okay? So I'm just gonna leave this area now. Okay? And then I'm gonna go to my next area, which is on the other side. You can actually see it. So I'm gonna move my work a little bit to the left. There we go. So I'm gonna work on this area now. Working patches, working patches. You see, I actually went inside this little link thing, but it's okay. We'll fix it with the brown color. It's easier to fix with a darker color because it covers up the light rather than working with a light and dark. Back and forth, back and forth. You don't want to go in a crisscross direction. That actually came out wrong. I mean, like, go up and down and then left and right. Don't do that. Keep it to one direction. Is that still a thing? Do people actually listen to One Direction still? Fangirls? Is One Direction is still a thing? Let me know in the comments. Yeah, because I haven't heard of them like in a while. Like, it used to be like people would like keep mentioning their name. And also, if you get like balls of paint on your tip of the brush, like bits of paint, just use a clean part of your glass palette to actually smooth out the tip of the brush, because you get less texture. And remember, this project is about less texture the better. Okay, I'm actually done with one layer from this side, so I'm gonna go to the next, which is like this lower area. I'm gonna let that dry, and I'm gonna go back with another layer because I made a huge mess of texture here. So I'm gonna go here. That's the thing, when it has a lot of white in it, you will experience a lot of this problem. I'm gonna be careful here in this case because I already painted that blue and I don't have the time to actually remake it. I did go over it a little bit, but we're human. We make mistakes. It's part of life. Deal with it. I'm actually here to copy, because if I wanted to get a perfect copy, I would just use Illustrator and printed it out. Right? It's about trying to get it as close as always. It's part of the human error is what actually makes an artwork personal. I mean, and that's what I think. Okay, it may not be the right way to think, but I don't care. It's my philosophy. Yeah, if you're working in a studio, like a game studio, film studio, or whatever, it actually matters, because people are going to be looking at it and it doesn't make sense. It's going to cause problems, especially for your career. But when you're working on something like this personal, it gives it a little bit of style, you know, your touch as an artist. Yeah. Sorry, I want to get a lot of paint on there, okay? Don't be stingy, make a lot of paint, use a lot of paint. That's what paint is for. It's for using, okay? If you don't use a paint, that's counterproductive. If you don't use paint, you don't get a good painting. Use a lot of paint, makes a lot of paint. I mean, not a lot like that girl I told you about, but get some paint on your canvas or your board or whatever, okay? Ooh, beautiful. Just beautiful. Look how close that color is to the original. Very good. Really happy with how it came out. The first time I actually get a color right on this project. Perfect. And also another thing you want to keep in mind about acrylics is that there's a lot of wait time, because sometimes you don't want to like mix colors because they're gonna dry on your palette. You're gonna waste them, okay? So it's better to sometimes just wait, instead of just going to work on a different area, sometimes you just wait and be done with the layering of one area, and then go work on the other areas. Because you don't want to lose your paint. Especially if that paint is close, you will be tempted to reuse that paint to make another color, and then when the layer dries up and you're like, oh no, what did I do? It's now I have to make that color again because I have to paint it again because it has a texture to it that I don't like. See, so that's something you want to avoid and keep in mind. Also, maybe a good thing I saved some of the blues on my palette because I have to go back and fix the mess that I just made here. I'm going to go in a little bit into the blues right here. Okay. Okay, so there's still this area that I need to paint, but this brush is too big. Remember, brush size is another thing that people actually take for granted. You need the appropriate brush size. So I'm thinking that I can use this brush for this part, and then use a smaller brush for the inside the eyes and whatnot. So by the way, guys, can you see like this patch that was really bright when it was wet, and now it's like completely dry? Okay, so I'm gonna dip my brush in water and then take the water out of the brush. It seems counterintuitive, but trust me, for vectorization you don't need that much water. Just gonna dry my brush. It makes my brush smooth. There's still a little bit wet, but still dry. Okay, I'm gonna put my dip. Take a look at how the brush has like some paint on the dip. I'm gonna work back from the edges. Remember, if you go over your wet layer, what happens is like the fresco effect, wet on wet, and guess what you get? Texture. You don't want texture. Not for this. Texture is good, just not for vectorization. It's your #1 enemy in vectorization. Okay, a couple of minutes have gone by, and we basically have a really clean area here. Remember the patch that was here, it was completely wet and it was shiny and it would look like a construction site, you know, one of those walls where to put the plaster in, the wet plaster, and it looks really bad. Well, it dries and naturally it will blend in. That's the thing with acrylics. It tricks you a lot. Unlike oil painting, which doesn't trick your eye, acrylics actually do. They appear really bright, really bright when they're wet. So I'm happy with this areas. We have some of the paper bleeding through, so we have to go over this area again. But these 3 areas that have like around 4 layers now in total, different colors but still 4 layers, and they're looking really good. This area, there were some discoloration, heavy discoloration, especially when the contrast between those discolorations are high, it will look choppy. And basically that means that we have to go through again and fix that. Now, I'm happy with the inside of it, just the edges. And the thing with edges is that you need a small brush for that. So I will be using this brush, the same brush I used for the inner parts here, and I will be going in and trying to fix it. So let's get started. I believe it's still a little bit wet, but hey, nothing's perfect. Just gonna go in with a lot of paint. Remember, especially if it's too wet and it's not completely dry, for layering it's better to use a lot of paint because it will make it worse, if not better. Yeah, it's a risky thing. I would suggest to wait for it to completely dry again, but we don't have that kind of time, so we actually have to go ahead with it. It may actually cover up some of the parts here, but I can go in, because they're a darker color, I can just go in and add those later. Okay. You know, especially with acrylics, having a gray color, gray paint tube, it helps a lot because acrylics, well, they dry fast, and if you make like a pile of gray, black plus white, it's gonna dry fast, and you don't always have it. And sometimes you have to desaturate. Like people rarely use paint straight out of tube, unless it's the exact color you want. Then sure, go ahead. But people rarely use colors straight out of tube, so they use gray. And basically, every time if you were to make it gray, it will just dry up. So it's better, I would say, like instead of having like yellow ochre or I don't know, alizarin crimson, get gray. Okay, get primaries, get gray. You can pretty much make most of the things. But instead of like going out and getting. And another thing is the mixing of the brands. It's not completely destructive to do that. Some brands like don't mix with others, especially if like they're different kind of paint. Don't do that. I don't recommend mixing brands, but in my case, it's mixing well. Okay, I'm not having problems. I'm mixing Liquitex with Windsor and this other cheapy color brand that I've never heard of, and it's all in all, it's working good. No complaints there. But especially with like more expensive brands, is something that I do not recommend at all. Okay, so now we're waiting for those patches to dry and see how it turned out. I'm actually going to go ahead and start layering the inside parts that we just painted. I believe I painted that off camera. I was waiting for them to dry. Yeah, it's the same pile of paint, just going in very carefully, because the more careful you are at this time, the less color you have to make later. But still, that doesn't mean the philosophy of going rough, fix it later, wrong. I want to make that the motto of my channel. Go in rough, fix it later. It's a great motto. Also, not recommended for life, but painting, especially with acrylics, I do recommend it. Really good, really smooth. Get a lot of paint on there. Don't be stingy. Stingy is bad. Okay, I'm getting a lot of texture here, so whenever you feel like in a vectorization project you're getting a lot of texture, just leave it, don't go over it. Going over means more texture. Unless there's like a big, huge chunk of paint on there, then yeah, go over with your brush to smooth it out, because if acrylics dry and those little chunks dry up, it will be hard to get off. Like it's almost impossible to get it off without damaging your work. Same like bristles, I believe. And if your paint is getting dry on the palette, just make more. Okay, don't use like half dry paint, because that would just give you more chunks of paint on the board. Okay. Okay, looking really good. I'm really happy with this. And as you can see, these parts that are drying back here, they are pretty much looking better, except the edges. The edges still need work, so I think I missed this edge, so I'm just gonna go and redo it again. Now it's always better to paint towards the edge from the opposite of that edge direction. So because sometimes if there's paint on the sides of your brush, it may go into the edge. So, but for the sake of you guys, so you can better see, I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna rotate my work. But that's something that I do a long time. And it's something that I recommend you guys doing as well. Okay, looking really, really good. I'm really satisfied. This edge right here is causing problems. Be gone, edge. Be gone. Okay, perfect. I guess that wraps it up for our background. Now, at this point, since I'm done with most of the background elements, what I really want to do is try and what I really want to do is try to get the dark edges in. Okay, so there are some outlines in the work. If you look at the reference picture, there are some outlines, and basically I just want to get the outlines in, the outlines that are on the reference here. I want to get those in. So depending on where the outline is, the color is going to be different. So I'm gonna start from the bottom. It's a raw umber kind of brown. It's like this area in the bottom. There's like a couple of rocks. They have an outline, and that outline is raw umber, I believe. Something like raw umber brown, or like a really dark brown. The same color in the wings. And basically, if I make that color, I may be able to use it as well in the wings. Because think modular with painting, especially if you look at the works of Claude Monet. You see that he actually reuses paint. Like there's like there's like the cliffs of Eretat where he makes this really light turquoise color, and he basically uses it on the water as highlights. He also uses it as highlights on the cliffs because like the water is reflecting. So you gotta think modular. You gotta think, if I make a color for here, can I use it for another place as well? This makes your workflow faster, and you may be able to actually complete it faster than just trying to go in and do it color by color. You know what I'm saying? Also, actually, may need to. Actually, no. The head needs to become bigger, I believe. Actually, you know what? I'm saying actually a lot. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna fix the edge of the head. Because like I was using a really big brush, I was not getting it. Okay. Because of that, we have to go in last for the outlines for that particular area. Now, guess that's pretty much it for this part. I'm gonna move in and make the color for the outlines, okay? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put this aside because it's wet and I don't want it to have my palette. I'm gonna show you my palette, but I don't want it to be on my work because it may get some color. I want it like to touch each other. Okay, so this dark brownish outline, I look at it because the first thing with color matching is that you need to look at it really, really good. So I'm looking at it and I see brownish gray, raw umber, that's being saturated. Now the thing is, from before we already had a pile of desaturated brown. So what I'm going to do is just use that, add a little bit of black, and basically go from there. Because it's just darker than the desaturated. The saturation is good, maybe even less, but the value is not good. So I'm going to start with value. Always remember the three parameters: hue, saturation, value. It's the same thing in traditional, same thing in digital. Those are the three parameters. It's better to start with hue and then saturation and then value, but in this special case, because I already have the saturation and the hue pretty close, it's not far off, I'm just gonna go in straight from the value. So I'm gonna take some out. Don't contaminate your original source. I have to like tell this to my classmates all the time. Never contaminate your original source. Okay, so I'm gonna add a little bit black. I believe, yes, this is fortunately still wet to some degree. And the thing with black is super strong, okay? Don't get a lot of it, like teeny tiny amount. Because the thing with black is that you can never go back. And I'm being honest, okay? I'm serious. No, I didn't mean that as a joke or anything. Because once you go black with the colors, you can't go back, because black is super strong. You just be wasting your color. Just leave the color. And okay, as I mentioned before, since gray has black in it, and basically half black and then half white, or maybe a different ratio, black will desaturate. There's no way around that. You can use a really saturated black, I guess, that's either warm or cool, but it's the way the world works, and it will give you a desaturated color. So we're losing color here. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put some more brown on my palette. And the thing with this, if you work like this, you can start small, and then the more color you add, the more paint you have. So you can work that as to your advantage. Put some burnt umber on there. Put some burnt umber. Okay, I'm gonna mix it in. Okay, and if you remember, I said that this resembles more to the raw umber rather than burnt umber. So what I'm gonna do, the thing with raw umber is that it has a little bit of green into it. So what I'm gonna do is actually try and add a little bit of green so that it may become more of a umber. Okay, this little pile of green is already dried up, so I'm gonna add, I believe it's a phthalo green. Maybe a little bit too vibrant. That's the thing with cheap brands. You usually don't get the color right. So it's a really vibrant green. Okay, the green is strong, so just use a little bit of it. Actually, I might be using a lot of it here. No, actually, it's the perfect amount. Okay, and you get like this switch kind of color, but it's still too desaturated. So I'm gonna add in more brown to make it saturated. You see, I'm working with the tip of my knife. I'm not adding big chunks of paint. Okay, I'm working with the tip of the knife. If you work small steps, you get the right color, you're happy. If you work big steps, you will miss it by a mile, as people would say. Sometimes you can even drag the color in. The thing with dragging the color into your pile is that you actually get like gradients, and you can maybe see if that gradient is right for you. I mean, that color that you got in the gradient is right for you. Okay, so as I said, the thing with acrylics is that they will appear lighter in the palette, but I'm thinking that it's actually right for the outlines here. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna stop here and take my palette back. And get my painting on the camera. Work on the outlines here. The white lines are completely disappearing, and I'm loving it. I am loving it. Please don't sue me, McDonald's. Please don't. Okay, so I'm getting a smaller brush. This is really small. It's not a fine brush, still a flat. And a small brush nonetheless. Okay. I am going to I put it in the water. I cleaned it with my rag. Apparently I cleaned it with the dirty part of my rag. Get a good rag, a big rag, no small rag. Rags. Okay, so I'm gonna dip my brush into the paint. Okay, this is one of those situations that you might want to rotate your work because you want to work against that color, and this was a really hard color for me to get. It took a lot of time, so I don't want to ruin it. I don't want to go in rough. I know it's hard for me to admit it, but no going in rough. Okay, we're gonna do it really fine. Okay, we gotta be really careful. And since it's a flat, you can also use it in a back and forth motion. Get a flat color. Okay, but that will be bad for your vectorization, okay? So you don't want to tap it a lot, or you get like splashes. And it's like, at this point it's like sketching. Okay, but it's easier to know it's your always one side is gonna come out really clean, the other side of the brush is gonna be like splashy and whatnot. Okay, I need to look at my reference picture to see if I'm going the right direction. I am, even though I messed it up a little bit. Comes really thin here, but no biggie. I'm gonna argue it's personal touch. Honestly, it's really hard to argue with the teacher. I do not recommend arguing with the teacher. It's harder than arguing with a teenager. I'm a teenager. Or at least I think I am. Maybe I'm too old, I don't know. What do you guys consider old? I'm entering my 20s and I feel old. Maybe I am. Fine print. Okay. Just a little bit of work here. Okay. And then also the bottom of that rock. Okay. Oh, if you're wondering where this is from, it's from a Czech movie, a Czech animation, I believe, it's from the 70s, I think. I'm not too sure, don't quote me on that. But I believe it's called Fantastic Planet. Or something like that. It's cheesy. It was cheesy. For a second I thought my teacher was going to play. We watched the movie in class. And when she said the name Fantastic, I was thinking, oh, Fantastic Beasts. It was nice because it wasn't like close to the release of Crimes of Grindelwald, even though it wasn't what I expected from a Wizarding World franchise, but still, yes, I'm a Harry Potter fan. I'm a big Harry Potter fan. Not so much of Fantastic Beasts, but it helps with the addiction to Harry Potter. God, I'm loving this raw umber thing. Raw umber is a really cool looking brown. Like, it gives it a depressing mood. No other color can do. One brown to rule them all, eh?
Many hours later.
Oh, there are some outlines here. Okay. Yeah, I might have made this larger than it should have been, but yeah, things happen. It's not necessarily long. There we go, fixed. Okay. Now I'm just looking to see where else I might be able to add this brown. So you always want to think like that. Okay, I'm thinking on the edge of my, whatever this jellyfish looking thing is. Right here, this does have an edge. There we go. Okay, and I'm just looking to see where else I might be able to get it. Because some of the outlines are more grayish, and I don't just want to go in with this really dark color. But I'm just looking to see where else I might be able to this color in. Apparently there are a couple of places I might do this. For example, here, can add it. Oops, that's not the right place. My bad. Apparently I already did add it. Just missing out where the legs are. Okay. Also, sorry, and this is sometimes a problem. Like, you especially with like really complicated artworks like this. Like, it's sometimes hard to remember where you're supposed to put the paint, and then your paint dries. You make another pile. You realize, oh no, I didn't paint in that area and I just lost my paint. And this is one of those situations where you keep forgetting where exactly you need to put your paint in. But no matter, got another pile. Just make another pile. Okay. And I also see some outlines over there with this color. Okay, there we go. At this point I'm considering to switch to another brush that's more fine. So I'm going to go to my brush. Now, So this is what I'm thinking of using for more outlines, because the outlines are getting thinner and thinner, and that's something I cannot do with a flat brush. Maybe we keep calling it flat brush anymore. So the problem that I have with fine brushes is that you need to just put more paint on it as you go. It's like it doesn't really hold that much paint. And in my opinion, they're harder to control. Way harder. Okay, this is not a good brush. Let me get even a more fine brush. Okay, this is even a thinner brush than that. I believe it's 00. It says on the thing, but these are not necessarily good brushes. But oh my, this is perfect. I should have used this from the beginning. Doesn't really hold that much paint, but definitely gets the job done. Perfect. It might not look clean right now, but when I go over with the opposite color, it's gonna be really clean and good looking. So, no stress there. Really good. Okay. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just go over my outline, especially in the last area, because the brush is so thin, it's leaving a lot of textures. Just want to go over that. Oops. And I believe it's a little bit too dark for the outlines. It's okay. No biggie there. Okay, looking good. Now I'm gonna just go ahead and reuse the paint for some of the wing areas up here, especially here and here. This doesn't have that much blackish brown in there, but yeah, that's it.